about our expert. Brandon Hampton has almost 20 years of leadership, business development, and mobility experience. He's worked with hundreds of organizations, including government agencies, and over half of the Fortune 100, helping them to optimize and improve their mobile environments. These organizations ranged in size from a few mobile devices to thousands. He brings his expertise to us today for our webinar on cost allocations and chargebacks in a mobile world. And now I'll turn it over to Brandon.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us today on our third edition of this webinar series. And this is one that's kind of near and dear to my heart, talking about cost allocations and chargebacks in a mobile world. And it's, I know that makes me kind of weird that cost allocation is near and dear to my heart, but I can just remember back in the day when I was working for one of the major carriers and trying to help customers allocate their charges effectively and optimize at the same time was a challenge. And it was one that I remember in my younger days back working for the carriers when pooling plans were just starting to become popular, that it was a real problem. So I've been working with several companies and helped develop solutions around this problem over the last several years, so I'm kind of excited to talk to you guys about it today. And just kind of to sum up our discussion today into a few different points, it's and I tried to really find some areas in this discussion that could really have an impact on your bottom line and fairly quickly, and that they're simple but maybe not easy to deploy, but at least they're simple and easy to grasp, and I think a lot of companies can take advantage of at least a portion of what we're going to talk about today. It's not all of it. I know some companies are taking advantage of this already, but the majority of the companies I talk to are lacking in one of these areas. So I think you'll find some value out of this today. We're going to talk about visibility and how valuable that is, whether it's visibility as pertains to the administrators within an account or visibility as it pertains to the end users. True cost allocation, we're going to go a little bit deeper into and I guess beyond traditional cost allocation and talk about some alternative ways to allocate charges more accurately and effectively. And we're going to talk about equipment costs and how to allocate that in a different way and have, I think, an interesting conversation around that. And really our goal today is to increase accuracy and reduce costs. And I know most of the IT people I talk to are directed to do that almost every day. So we're going to talk through that today. Some of the common traps and misconceptions, I think, these are really the three, kind of tie in with the three discussion points. First of all, the first trap as it pertains to visibility is I think management and IT assumes that the end users know a lot more about voice and data consumption and cost than they really do. It's interesting how often when you actually are able to push information out to end users, how impactful that can be to an organization. And frankly, it surprised me when I first kind of witnessed this phenomenon. So we're going to talk a little bit about that trap. Another trap is that accounting teams use the carrier bill typically as their vehicle for cost allocation. That's very common, and we're going to talk about why that's a trap and what are some of the ways to get around that or climb out of that trap. And then the third trap is around procurement and IT and the fact that they believe that buddy upgrades are unnatural. I really couldn't think of a better word than that. It's I think a lot of times the carriers have created an attitude around buddy upgrades that I don't know, makes it sound like you're doing something wrong or something, but we're going to talk about those and how maybe a lot of companies are leaving money on the table by not taking advantage of that. So kind of jumping into our visibility discussion, and there are a couple of different levels of visibility. One is as it pertains to the administrators of a mobility environment. And that's typically around, having visibility, having a better understanding of the plans you have, the features, who has what, the usage that each user is using their devices, and that's kind of obvious. I think a lot of organizations realize that the more visibility that administrators can have, the more value that brings to their company, and it gives them the information they need to make better business decisions. And frankly, it's getting harder for them too. There are multiple carriers, multiple plan types now, lots of different types of pooling plans, and it's becoming more and more difficult to understand. So any visibility that they can achieve is typically helpful. And a lot of times the carriers have actually gotten a lot better in this regard. It can still be very cumbersome, but at least there's more information available than there used to be, for sure. And I think in the end, IT is very stretched these days. I shouldn't say every, I hate saying that, but almost every company I talk to mentions that they're trying to do more with less these days. So anything that you can give IT people, especially mobility administrators, and to make their lives easier and delivered in an easy way is going to be beneficial to that visibility. But really, I think the more interesting conversation today, and maybe the less obvious one, is around enterprise visibility. And it's one that I think is very underrated in its value today. And it's a way to, and what that really means is the more information you can drive down to end users and cost center owners and managers within an organization, it's going to give them more information to be able to make better decisions as it pertains to the health of the company they work for. And I always like to tell a funny story about a friend of mine who I worked at one of the major carriers with years ago, and we actually kind of worked in this industry, the mobility management industry, together. And he always used to tell the story about he and his wife going on vacation to, I think they were in the Bahamas or something, and she worked for a major pharmaceutical firm. And they were sitting on the beach, and her phone rang, and she answered it, and it was somebody from work. And they had a actual work topic to discuss, and it was, he's listening to her. It probably took 5 minutes. And then she sits there and talks to her friend from work for another 40 minutes on the phone, sitting on the beach in some exotic location. And she hangs up. And he goes, do you have any idea how much that phone call cost? And I never forget his quote. She said, I don't know, we get a great deal with AT&T. I think it was probably free. And he's like, I'm sure it wasn't free. So I think that just really illustrates the point that, and she was a very well-respected person within this organization and had a great job with this pharmaceutical firm, but she had no idea how much that phone cost or that phone call cost, or that she could possibly be spending the organization's money in an irresponsible way. So I think visibility has a much greater impact than what a lot of IT people think. So being able to kind of make sure that your users know what their usage and what they actually cost the organization can really help raise awareness of the costs and really help drive those costs out. And it really helps drive accountability too, because you've got, if cost center owners and managers have a real strong understanding of what their particular users are costing the organization, they can impact that cost. And I actually worked with one Fortune, probably Fortune 10 company, one of the larger companies in the country, and they had an initiative to really drive this awareness. This is really where I first was able to kind of witness the impact it could have. And they saw a reduction in their usage by almost 20% within 6 months after pushing the information down. And this was in a time when data usage was growing, well, still is, but it was growing dramatically anyway. So to see a reduction was really exciting to them. And it was just that attitude that kind of Big Brother is watching. And so that's one way. If an organization has it within their the technology that they have, or the ability to push information to users about what they are truly costing the company, it can have a big impact. So looking at a little more, I guess, involved conversation around cost allocation, let's first talk about what it is. It's just that ability to charge back to individual users what their particular mobile device or devices are costing the company. And that can be in the voice, data, text, all the add-ons, and then you've got equipment, and how do you charge that back to the particular user. And I think there's a real interesting dynamic that's occurred around charging back mobility And it started when, in the beginning, cell phones, you bought a plan for a phone, and that plan stayed with that phone, and that's what that phone cost. And it's kind of in the vein of all the wireline chargebacks that have historically happened within companies. And, you look at the line on the bill, and that's pretty much what it costs. Well, I don't know exactly when, but let's say 15, 20 years ago, carriers started to push pool plans onto companies. And it was a way for companies to save money by pooling minutes together. The moment they did that, they threw a huge monkey wrench in our cost allocation and our ability to charge back effectively and accurately. So I think that was it was an interesting moment, and it really kind of it really changed the landscape and made it very challenging for organizations to be accurate and cost effective at the same time. And so when you want to look at what true cost is and how I define it is to basically allocate charges based on usage and what that individual truly costs the organization. And that there's a real link between true cost allocation and plan optimization, and being able to buy minutes, buy data, buy texting from the carriers as inexpensively as possible, while at the same time optimize, being able to charge back effectively and having a truly optimized program. So I've always found that a very interesting link, and we're going to talk a little more in detail now about that. And I think by using a scenario or telling a story, I think it can help. So let's look at a typical scenario that I see all the time within IT organizations. You've got an executive team, and they're starting to see mobility costs escalate. You're probably seeing the same thing within your organization. It's very common. And they'll go to, at some point, there's a red flag goes up. Somebody happens to look at the bill that month and get excited, and they go to their IT team and say, hey, we've seen an escalation in costs. We need to, reduce our mobility costs or our wireless bills by 20% or 10% or whatever they say. Happens probably every day in our country. So those IT people, they go to look at their sample of users, and let's use this kind of fictional company and these fictional 4 users that this IT staff manages, and they're costing them about $320 a month. So what does the typical IT person do? Well, they, first of all, in analyzing what that looks like, you've got 4 users. They're all on plans that they were put on initially because they tried to more closely reflect what that user was actually costing the organization. So you've got your user 1 who isn't using very many minutes, and that person is on a lower dollar plan. And then you've got user 2, who's your second tier user, and he's on a little more expensive plan. And then user 3 and 4 are on the most expensive plans, or more expensive plans. And all these users' minutes are pooling together, which is also extremely common today. And you can see that that pool of minutes that company is sharing is 5,800 minutes. And you can see that the users actually use 3,800 of that 5,800 minutes, and they're paying $320 a month. And then when they allocate the charges for this particular scenario or this environment, they're taking user 1 and going straight across, and they cost $40 their plan, and that's what gets charged back to that user's cost center, and so forth for all the other users. And that's a very common environment that we see today. Their pool utilization of their minutes is 66%, and they're paying over 8 cents a minute. Extremely common. So what does the IT person do? So they call their carrier rep up, and they say, hey, we need to save money. We need to do something. We're spending too much. Maybe they threaten to go to another carrier. I don't know what they say, but I actually worked for a carrier. I was a carrier rep a long time ago, and I took those calls. And so typically what they do is they say, well, let me look at your plans and everything. Let's see if we can try to save you some money by optimizing. So either the carrier rep, or maybe there's an assigned billing rep or support rep. Typically, depending on the size of the company, a lot of times it's just the carrier salesperson that's doing this. They'll go through and look at the plans and see if there's a better way to buy minutes, and maybe they can reduce some of the plans and save money. So if we look at the second situation here, where the carrier optimization, so they're looking at those 4 users, and their pool of minutes, and they say, well, look, if we drop user 3 and 4 down to 1,350 minutes, that's a little closer to what they're actually using. We reduce our pool to 4,500 minutes. The minutes used is the same. The plan cost actually drops down to $280. We haven't done anything to mess up our cost allocation. As you can see, it's all still a straight pass-through charge, and we've dropped a couple of the users' costs to be a little closer to what they're using. In fact, user 2 is probably complaining, or I'm sorry, user 3 before was complaining because user 2 is only costing $80, and my plan costs $100, and we're using about the same amount. So now that's a little closer, so that you probably won't hear those complaints anymore. And you're looking at your pool utilization. We actually increased it to 86%, so you're using more of the minutes that you pay for. And we've actually dropped the bill by 13% and the cost per minute down to 7.3 cents a minute. So the carrier rep takes all this analysis and this information, goes back to the IT staff of our fictional company and presents it, and you know, there's a lot of fanfare. There's probably confetti falling from the ceiling. Everybody's happy. Save 13%. The IT staff marches into their executive's office and puts the findings on the table. Here's what we were able to do. He pats them on the back. Nice job. And everybody's happy, right? And that happens every day, and it's happened for many years. Like I said, I was involved in many of those scenarios back when I worked for a carrier back in the day. So, however, you know, looking at that, you know, the question is there a better way? Is there a more effective way to solve, not only solve the problem of paying too much, but maybe a more accurate way to allocate charges, a more effective way to manage this whole process? So let's look at an alternative way. And first of all, you'll notice, so what we've done is really presented a different configuration that this company could take advantage of that could potentially lower their costs. So if we look at user 1, what we're going to do with them is put them on a $25 add-a-phone plan that doesn't contribute any minutes to the pool. User 2, we're going to do the same thing. User 3, we're going to put on a 200-minute plan, which is only $30. And user 4, we're going to put on a 4,000-minute plan, which costs $150. And if we look at the outcome of changing the plan configuration to something like this, we're buying 4,200 minutes, which is actually a 92% pool utilization. So we're much more efficient in using the minutes that we're paying for. On a side note, there was a study, and this was a few years ago, that carriers make the most 80% of their revenue on overages or underages. In other words, companies or individuals buying more minutes than they need or going over the minutes they need and then charging them a lot per minute. So huge revenue source for them. So the more efficient you can be in how you buy minutes is going to be the most cost effective for you. So we're at 92% utilization, which is a very safe rate. The minutes used are the same. The plan cost we've dropped down to $230. So we've saved even more money from the $280 before down to $230, or 28% in overall savings. So that's great. Everybody's happy. So why doesn't everybody do this? Because when you go to allocate the charges, you've got problems, right? You've got user 1 who's only paying $25, or he's only costing $25. You've got user 2, $25, user 3, $30. User 4 is paying $150, so the majority of the cost is lumped on that one user. And if you were to go to line item back to the cost centers, there's going to be a lot of screaming and yelling. So is there a better way to allocate the charges more effectively? And in my opinion, yes, there is. If you base the chargeback on what those users are actually, what their usage looks like. For example, for user 1, they're using 315 minutes. Well, we've calculated the cost per minute now in our newly configured environment at 6 cents per minute. And that's, again, much lower than before. But if we take that 6 cents and multiply it by 315 minutes, then we come up with an $18.81 cost allocation. And we do the same for each user. And as you can see, when you allocate the charges based on the usage, so the user 2 is costing $61.20 and so forth, and you base that chargeback on what the minutes they were using, A, the totals match at the bottom, so the plan cost and the allocated charges are the same, and B, you've got a much more accurate reflection of what each of those users actually cost the organization. And hopefully, if that makes sense to everyone, it's a much more accurate way. And as you can see, because we've gotten really creative on how we were able to buy minutes from the carrier, it's by far the most cost-effective way to do it. And in my experience, what I'm seeing is a lot of organizations have attempted to do something like this. Most are not doing anything like this because it's challenging. But I'm here to tell you, I've seen organizations do this on spreadsheets. And I also know that there's a lot of technology available today to companies that will actually do this automatically for you. So it's an important aspect to everything we're doing. So when we let's jump ahead and look at what buddy upgrades look like. And I don't know if anyone's familiar with what a buddy upgrade is. We're going to talk about that in a minute. And we're going to talk about how this all kind of ties back to how we talked about allocating charges before. And how I think this is another really interesting conversation to have, because buddy upgrades really is taking advantage of the upgrade eligibility that a company has with a carrier. And I consider that an asset, a corporate asset. And if you look at historically what carriers have done, I mean, they know what they're doing in this regard. And let's jump back and take a look at Europe, for example. So in Europe, for years now, the way you buy a cell phone and mobility plan in Europe is you go pick out your phone, you buy your phone, and then you go find a carrier that you want. You take your phone to them, and they activate their service on the device that you already own. And that's been common all over the world. Now, in the United States, we did things a little bit differently, and we've been very slow to kind of evolve from this. But the United States has offered plans where I guess we're, the borrowing society, that we enjoy our debt, and that's what we've been doing with carriers. We've been getting in debt to them because they'll subsidize the cost of that phone. So we're getting our phone directly from the carrier. They offer a huge subsidy, and they give it to you for free or much cheaper than if you were to buy it on your own. And then they build into the cost of their plans additional dollars to pay for those devices. And they make you sign like a 2-year contract or 18 months or whatever the carrier is in order to make sure that they keep you long enough to recover the cost of that device. So historically, that's kind of how carriers have worked. And now we're starting to see some shifts today. We're starting to see, especially on the consumer side, we're starting to see more plans where carriers are allowing users to bring unlocked phones. And by the way, those are the phones that you would buy separate and you can take to whatever carrier you want, versus the locked phone variety that we've had for years, where you buy a phone from AT&T or Verizon and it has to stay with them. So we're moving in that direction. And what we're seeing also as a result is we're getting these really inexpensive plans that users can take advantage of. And maybe the uneducated user is saying, wow, plans are going down, the costs are going down. Well, they're really not. It's just that you're buying your phone on your own. In fact, they'll tack on a payment onto the bill, and if you add the payment up to the cost of the new plan, it's pretty close to what it was before, if not a little bit more. So there's that. But then if we go back and we look at, it's much slower to adopt as far as corporations are concerned. And in fact, you'll still find that the most cost-effective plans are those in which a contract is tied to it and there's a subsidy tied to it. And the reason is because carriers know that companies are not going to be efficient in when they use their upgrades, when they take advantage of that asset that they have today. They know that they're not going to be efficient in how they do that. So let's talk a little bit about that. And so a buddy upgrade, let's define it first. So let's jump into what is a buddy upgrade. Well, let's pretend we've got Bob, and Bob drops his iPhone, and I know about 4 people today whose iPhone looks just like that. I mean, they walk around with a broken screen and it still works. It's funny. Well, finally, Bob goes to IT and says, I got to get my iPhone fixed. And so IT looks at his phone. Hey, it's been 2 years since you've upgraded, or 2.5 years. Let's get you a new iPhone, and we've got the eligibility, and we can get the iPhone for $50. So they get Bob the new iPhone. Well, 6 months later, after Bob has upgraded, he drops it again. And by the way, I also know the same people that have these phones tend to always have a screen that looks like this, so it's kind of funny. But that looks like a golf ball hit it or something. But so anyway, Bob drops it again, and he doesn't have an upgrade eligibility left because he used it 6 months ago, and it was a 2-year contract. Usually they allow you to renew after 18 months today. So they have to buy a brand new phone at retail, which is $550 approximately. Sometimes it's more than that, depending on the phone. And IT's not happy, and the company's not happy. So there is an alternative, and a lot of companies are trying to do this to a degree today. But let's look at I think this is interesting. So we got Martin here, who hasn't upgraded his phone since the 80s. Our VP of marketing pointed out that this is actually Martin, the guy who invented the cell phone. I didn't know that. But anyway, so he likes his brick phone from Magnum PI or whatever 80s show that was from. And so he hasn't upgraded in a long time. So what the company is able to do is to use Martin's upgrade eligibility, the solution, use Martin's upgrade eligibility in order to get Bob a new phone. Well, it creates some other challenges when we do that. So what happens is when the bill arrives, Martin's line item on his bill is going to show the cost of that device. So everything's going to be lumped into that, into Martin's cost. So the challenge that organizations face is, all right, how do I effectively and accurately allocate this equipment cost? So I have to take the charge that's on Martin's bill and shift it to Bob somehow, and I have to do this over and over again as I try to take advantage of all of these buddy upgrades that take place. So that's a real challenge, and a lot of companies try to do this. They're not always that effective in how they manage it, but I think everyone kind of has an idea that there could be a way to save money here, but not all are doing it. So when we look at how to solve this problem, and I think first of all that companies, as they look at their equipment costs and their upgrade eligibility, there needs to be a real shift in kind of the attitude they have around it. Now, carriers have been very reluctant. In fact, some of them have come out and said, oh, we don't allow this anymore. Now, there's really no way they can stop it, but you can understand their motivation. Because as I mentioned before, a huge percentage of their revenues come from being able to take what should be a $30 rate plan, adding $15 onto it, making it a $45 rate plan, which covers the subsidy for the device. And then when they get through that initial two-year contract time and they don't upgrade the device, then that's extra $15 that they're just throwing in their pockets every month from that rate plan. So that's where, when companies, if they could effectively take advantage of the upgrade eligibility that they have and upgrade phones when they should. In fact, the more effective organizations are encouraging users to upgrade at that 2-year mark because they're going to be more effective. Newer phones are they're going to work better. They're going to have better battery life. They're going to have more features and functionality. It's better that they're going to be able to operate more efficiently. And then by utilizing all those carrier upgrade eligibilities with users that break phones, you're not ever paying full retail for a phone. And it's a really cost-effective way to manage your program. Now, a lot of people are going to say, well, Brandon, what if I run out of eligibility? Then what do I do? Then the next guy breaks his phone. What do I do? Well, if that happens, then you should pat yourself on the back because you've taken full advantage of the upgrade eligibility that the carrier has given you, and you've spent the least amount that you possibly could on equipment costs while taking advantage of the rates that you were getting. So that's actually a very good situation. And if you have to start paying full retail until you get some more devices that are eligible for upgrade, then there are ways that you can allocate that cost in a different way if you get to that point. I haven't run into many organizations that have gotten that point. Usually they're smaller if they do. Larger organizations, it's rare that you ever get to that point. So So anyway, looking at that, just the point is that I've seen companies solve this. You can solve this on your own. You can do this on your own. You can task your IT staff with the fact that, I know this can be challenging to track, but if we keep a spreadsheet or something with our cost center allocation for each user on, and we allocate the true usage and we allocate the equipment charges, it can be done on a manual basis. I've seen companies do it. So that there is hope. Now, I will also tell you that there are technologies available that will allow you to do this almost automatically. And I've seen companies really drive to an efficiency point that really we've never seen before with some of the newer technologies, where they're really able to take advantage of what the carriers are giving them. And I would say that, the carriers over time, they've made a lot of money by creating a lot of complexity around their environments, and they do it with pool plans. They do it with the upgrade eligibility by subsidizing equipment costs and charging more for that. They throw a lot of smoke screens at us because they make a lot of money on companies that don't efficiently manage programs frankly, because of ignorance, because they don't understand that, the subsidies that carriers offer on equipment is more than, it means that you're paying more than you should be paying for a rate plan, or that the pool of minutes that they give you, they sell you pools of minutes because typically companies don't buy minutes efficiently, and typically they buy either way too few minutes, or they get in a situation where they're teetering right on that overage point, and about every third month they'll jump into overages and have to pay them, and then everybody throws their arms up and they get scared and they add more minutes, and then they try to get close to it, and it's a constant battle to try to stay there. And you know what else they're doing? They're making it more complex because now they're pooling data. And I know in the near future we're going to see text pooling coming. I think we actually have already seen that in a couple rare cases. So that's coming as well. So it seems like that companies have actually asked for this stuff because they saw how much cheaper it was to get pooled minutes, and they can pool data, pool text, and it is. There are huge advantages to the pooling. The disadvantages are, and where the carriers are kind of licking their lips, is that they know it won't be managed efficiently. So there are huge opportunities that if you can take advantage of this, if you can manage this stuff efficiently, it's going to benefit in a huge way. So let's go back and kind of recap a little bit what we talked about today, and kind of maybe tie up some loose ends and weave all this together so it kind of makes sense. So when we talk about visibility, in order to really drive visibility throughout your organization, in my opinion and what I've seen is that organizations that take advantage of a true cost allocation, which takes that user's actual usage information coming from the carrier, that usually it's from pooled minutes today, but now we're actually seeing a lot of pooled data plans. And sometimes that means just a pass-through charge if that particular user has I don't know, some kind of navigator or some kind of feature on his line that only he needs, or maybe it's tethering or something like that. So you add that charge on, and then the data, the pooled portions of the plans are charged back based on that user's usage and their calculations. The data pooling is just like the minute pooling that we saw before, only you're talking about megabytes or kilobytes instead of minutes, so there's really no difference. And it's charged back based on what that user's usage is, and that number is based on what the total cost across the whole organization is. So if you're charging back that way, and then you're able to push that information down to users at a user level, at a cost center owner level, at a manager level, then you're able to create a lot of visibility, a lot of ownership, a lot of accountability. And you don't even have to implement any. I've seen a lot of companies implement thresholds where, maybe they have a technology that can alert them or alert the user or the manager if a user exceeds a certain usage threshold. And that's certainly possible, and that certainly will help if users know they're going to get a nasty email, or even in some cases I've seen in some areas where they'll actually charge the user back if they go over. So, and that's certainly an option, but in my experience, just the understanding that the IT staff has the ability to see exactly what you cost the company is enough. and it's enough to drive a different type of behavior. And I think just kind of eliminating that ignorance that exists at the end user level, and we talked about the story of my friend's wife sitting on the beach taking the expensive call. Had she known what that call would have cost, I know she would have kept that call to 5 or 10 minutes rather than 40 that she did. And I think that's the same with most employees. Most employees want to do right by the companies they work for. There are always exceptions, but by and large, most do. And I think my experience with what has happened to what I've seen happen in large organizations when this visibility is pushed down to the user level, the reduction in usage that we're seeing is a direct result of that. It's just that educating those users, giving them knowledge is a huge benefit. So true cost allocation is a key piece to that. Now, true cost allocation is also a key piece to being able to optimize effectively so that you can take your current environment and make sure that you are purchasing minutes and data and text as cheaply as you can. And being able to allocate costs on a true cost basis is really important, because what it does is it frees you up to buy those minutes and data and text in as creative a way as you can come up with, without worrying about how those charges are going to be allocated back to the user. And that's a huge thing. When I told that story in the very beginning about working for the carrier, that was always the question that I had. You know, I would come back, and I remember the first time I did this. I was a green, young carrier rep. Company calls me up, says, hey, we need to save some money. I do this optimization, and I do it just like the good example I showed you, where we had we had a bunch of 0-minute usage, and then we had a bunch of out-of-phones, and then a few users with all the minutes added on, and I put all this optimization together, saved him a bunch of money, went back and presented it to him, and he was like, Brandon, this is great, but I can't do this. I'm like, and my eyes went up. I'm like, why? He goes, I got to allocate these charges, and that was the first time I had heard about allocating charges. I was like, huh? And he's like, yeah, I've got to be able to, charge back to each user. And this is going to, the guys who get hit with these big plans are going to be mad, and these other owners are, they're going to be happy. Their cost just went down by a lot. So I went back with my tail between my legs thinking, wow, working for a carrier, I can't solve this problem. So I've got to try to find a way to put it. That's why so many companies have everybody on the same plan, or they try to put users on plans that are closer to what their usage is. But then the light bulb went on a little while later. If there was a way to do this outside of the bill, then you'd be golden. So that's where true cost allocation comes from. And then we tie that into true equipment costs. So if we're going to be able to allocate charges effectively, equipment costs are a big part of that, and being able to allocate those charges effectively, and kind of being able to utilize what the carrier is giving us as well, and kind of not feel bad about the fact that we're using buddy upgrades, even though the carriers have discouraged it and said we shouldn't do that, because they've been overcharging us for 2 years to pay for the phone that we got a great deal on. So when that 2 years is up, then we need to take advantage of the fact that we're overpaying on those plans and take advantage of those upgrade eligibilities. So that's kind of the third piece in how it ties everything together. And then the final point I would say to all of this is that I have seen organizations do every one of these things with spreadsheets and with manpower and with manual processes. I've seen it multiple times, and I've seen it work effectively in those times. I've also seen IT staffs that have their time very constrained by the fact that they have to do this kind of stuff. And even though they understand the value of it, it's really challenging for them. And that's really where kind of the whole mobility management industry evolved, or one of the reasons it evolved, I think, was to provide tools and technology to organizations to help them do all this, to help them take advantage of the subsidies the carriers give, to take advantage of the fact that they're getting pooled plans, even though the carriers know people aren't going to take advantage of it the way they can because they can't allocate their charges effectively. So you can actually get the best deal you can from the carrier by doing it this way. So I think if we kind of start to wrap all this up, and maybe we have a question or two at the end, I would hope so, and I would encourage that, is the goal of increasing accuracy. So we're allocating charges much more accurately. We're pushing information out to the organization, and we're allocating equipment charges more accurately. I think we've accomplished that. And then reducing costs. Obviously, I think we've reduced costs in all of these areas, and we're going to see a reduction in cost. And I've seen a reduction in costs over and over and over from companies that take advantage of this type of thing. So that's my talk for today. That's the information I was excited to share with you guys. I hope you found value in it. Do we have any questions from anyone that has come up? Let's see, what chargeback features are for the home end? Yeah, the chargeback features to help understand trends from overages and underages. That's a good question. I think there are different ways to allocate charges when you have overages and underages. Underages is just, it's allocated because your cost per minute is going to be higher. If you're buying more minutes than you're using, you're basing the cost per minute off the minutes you use. So so the cost per minute is higher when you're not utilizing your pool efficiently. If you go over on your minutes, it's a really good question. And how you allocate overages, it's kind of the same question as how do you allocate account level credits or account level charges. And some carriers will bill, like they'll have you look at your bill and you'll have certain charges and credits that apply to the entire account. How do you allocate that? How do you allocate the overages? Well, the true cost is actually an extremely efficient way to do that, because organizations that are using the bill as their chargeback method really struggle with this. Overages are especially hard because what happens is, and maybe you don't realize this, when you go over on your pool of minutes, let's say you've got a 10,000 minute pool and you've got a bunch of users, and let's say Mary over here makes her third call of the month and she's used 20 minutes. But it just so happens that that call happens at the 10,000 minute mark, and she's the one who makes the call when they go over on their minutes. Well, the overage is usually charged on a cost per minute, and maybe it's 20 cents, maybe it's 30, depending on your plan and contract and whatever. But she's the one who gets hit with that 20 cent per minute call. Whether she's the first call, whether she charged 20 minutes or 200 minutes, it goes back to her. So when she looks at her line item, she's going to see I used 25 minutes and my plan cost this, but I was charged back, you know, all these overages. Why did I get the overages? And I didn't go over. Look, I didn't. I only used this many minutes. So that's a real challenge for companies when they use the bill for that cost allocation and they go over. So what the true cost does is it normalizes that. So if what it does is takes the overage cost and lumps it into your overall voice cost, and then it actually is used to calculate the cost per minute. So your cost per minute is going to go up a little bit, but then that's spread across everyone, which is a much more accurate way to do it, because Mary's not the one that caused the pool of minutes to go over. It wasn't her fault. She just happened to be, you know, the one in the line of the tornado, I guess. You know, it wasn't her fault. So hopefully that answered your question. Let's see. How many devices do you need for this process to be effective? You know, I don't know that there's a minimum other than, you know, I think you can make it, I think you can be effective in any situation. You saw we made it effective with 4 devices. And there are pool plans out there with 4. In fact, the major carriers are going with a lot of these family pool plans now that really are for small business, but I've seen large businesses take advantage of them too. And you know, you can have 15 lines and still take advantage. Now, you do run the risk of, if you're using buddy upgrades, which you still should, but you do run the risk of getting to that point where maybe you use them up, especially if you've got an organization that's hard on cell phones. Maybe you've got, you know, a service type organization, people are out in the field a lot. So there is that risk, but still, that doesn't mean you shouldn't take advantage of them. And I hear that argument all the time. Well, we don't do that because, you know, we use up our buddy upgrades. What are we going to do when the next guy breaks his phone? Like, well, we'll cross that bridge when we come to it, but you shouldn't just be throwing money to the carrier on the side just to avoid that situation that may happen down the road. And there are ways to handle that situation. So really good question, and I don't think there is a minimum number of devices. And there certainly isn't a maximum number of devices. Somebody's asking about getting real-time reporting for visibility from the carrier portal or from the carriers themselves. And yes, The carriers actually will have some threshold reporting that they'll send to the user if they exceed a certain amount. That can happen. Those same reports can be sent to like an administrator and that type of thing. The portals will do that. And you have to base those thresholds though on a usage. There's actually dollar amounts too that you can base it on for overages, but it certainly is not going to allocate charges on a true cost way. The carrier can't do that. I actually have heard stories about carriers doing this for customers lately, but it's a billing rep or a support rep who's doing it on spreadsheets on the side. Their system doesn't do it. So that's a key differentiator. And let's see, what was the other question? They were just talking more about asking about the carrier reporting and you know, how long it takes. And certainly, as I mentioned, I mean, the reporting in the carrier sites can be cumbersome. It can be it can take time. I mean, even with the best sites, a lot of times you have to, if there's a certain report you want, you have to submit, and you have to wait a couple hours to get it. It's certainly not easy to look at. And there are solutions out there. There are third-party solutions that will integrate all of carrier billing into one solution and make that so much easier to manage. I mean, it's just bottom line. Another challenge you have with the carrier billing, and when you got multiple carriers and you're getting reports from those carriers for visibility, it's difficult to, there's really no normalization across those reports. And what I mean by that is that one carrier may have a different type of pooling plan than another carrier. One carrier may allocate overages to the plans differently than the other carrier. One carrier a lot of times will use account level credits or discounts different than another one. A lot of times in regard to taxes and fees, one carrier, they call them something different than the other carrier. And it's really difficult to compare apples to apples when you're looking at these reports with multiple carriers. And again, there is technology out there that will do that for you. It'll take the bills from multiple carriers and give you one platform to report across. So it makes it easier. Doing it from the carriers can be challenging. But I will say that it's great that the carriers are now basically giving us all this information. In the past, they didn't. I mean, I remember the days when getting a report from the carrier was you calling up your rep and him having to go talk to somebody and they run a report and email it to you. I remember those days, and it's come a long way from there. Let's see, how can you automate the chargeback? Yeah, I mean, as I mentioned, there are technologies that will do that for you. I mean, it's really difficult to automate with spreadsheets. You can do the true cost allocation with spreadsheets, and again, I've seen companies do it. Some of the challenges that I didn't even talk about with the true cost allocation that sometimes comes up when I talk about this is, well, you know, what about like I've got a bunch of push-to-talk phones, and you know, how do I charge those back? I mean, they're not using any pool plans or anything. Or, you know, what about a voice-only phone? Or what about bundled plans? Like I've got these plans that have voice and text bundled together and then data's extra or something like that. Well, and those are all great questions. And I think in the end there's logic available to kind of solve all of those problems. Whether it's, one of the problems is that whether in the strictest true cost allocation, if you've got a user that doesn't use his phone that month, he's going to get charged back zero because there was no usage. And that's not really accurate because that phone cost the company something to have. So putting a base charge on every phone and even varying that base charge, whether it's a voice-only phone or some kind of bundled plan or a smartphone, you can adjust that base charge so that anything above and beyond that is billed back at a delta. So if somebody uses a lot more minutes, they're going to get billed back more than the person who doesn't use any, but they all have that minimum charge assigned to them. And that's a way to make that more accurate. And there's all kinds of solutions available to really charge back devices how you would like. And it shouldn't be something you're afraid of. It should be something you should embrace because there really are a lot of solutions. What expenses can I avoid? Well, I think by automating the chargeback, you know, you're avoiding the time it takes to do it if you're trying to do it manually. It can be challenging. It can take time. I think it's well worth the time. If you want to do it manually, it's worth it because of all the benefits we've been talking about today. And it will save more money than what it costs you to do, I think. But there is a cost to it, because if you've got somebody spending time on that, for sure there's going to be a cost. Okay, I think that's all the questions. I thank you guys very much for participation, and hopefully you found a lot of value in what we talked about today. And I was excited to share if these are topics that are important to me. And the last several years of my mobility career have been kind of educating companies on this stuff, that you don't have to rely on your carrier to do this stuff, because they won't do it very well for you. They have no incentive to do it very well for you. They have every incentive to drag it out as long as possible and delay as long as they can, making things easier for companies. So that's frankly why the mobility management space exists, and why the adoption is grown to well over 50% and continues to grow like crazy, because companies realize that they need help to solve these problems. So thank you again for everybody for your time, and that's all I have today.
Thank you, Brandon. We'll be sending the presentation out to everybody who registered for the event, and we'll also have contact information if you have additional questions. Thank you very much, and have a great day.